The gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas.
Thank you. I appreciate the chairman. Appreciate the witnesses. I heard some complaints earlier about how Republicans only complain when it's Democrats in the White House. I'd like to introduce you to the record. Editorial I wrote in March of 2019, 2 months into my term here. The president, that being Donald Trump, the president's spending cap busting budget shouldn't be the best we can do. And it goes on to beat the crap out of the president, and my friend Russ voted OMB for not doing enough to cut spending. So I'd like to insert that into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
As well as an article from Politico. House conservatives urge Trump to reject budget deal. That was July 2019. It was a letter that I led and a number of my colleagues signed on to, and which ticked off a number of my other Republican colleagues. But look, the point is we have, a lot of us have been screaming from the mountaintops about the need for spending restraint, regardless of who's in the White House and regardless of who's in control in the House or the Senate. The fact is and I want to applaud the bills that have been put forward, even if I have some disagreements with some of them, because they're at least trying to recognize the reality of what we face. The fact is, I mean, Mr. Simpson said it very well. I mean, the cuts have got to come from somewhere. And you know, I hear my colleagues, I just wish we could just find a way to stipulate the truth so that we can at least start from a baseline of the problems we're trying to tackle. Because according to the Fed, federal receipts as a percent of gross domestic product, I can't show a chart here because we don't do exhibits in the Rules Committee, but if you look at the chart and over time, federal receipts as a percent of gross domestic product prior to World War II were relatively small, right? World War II, they get up to about 20%, fall off a little bit, and they've fallen into a range of 15 to 20% over the last 80 years, basically. And at this particular moment in history, not knowing exactly how they're currently coming in like this month, they're at a relative high. It's just factual. Like the overall federal receipts, they're at a relative historic high. So can we at least just accept that as a baseline? And if not, can we have a debate about that and then decide? Because if the perspective, those are federal receipts, by the way. That's not counting state receipts. That's not counting the total tax burden on the American citizens in terms of property taxes, local taxes, sales taxes, all of the state income taxes, heavier in the Northeast, by the way. Coincidence? I think not, that people move south. The fact is, we've got massive revenues coming in. Could they be more? I guess. I mean, at the expense of what economic impact? And I think it would be really important for us to have a full-throated debate with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle and this side of the aisle. Can we establish the reality of revenue into the Treasury? Because if those are true, and there might be a debate, some learned economic scholars can come in and tax experts can come in and say, you're full of crud, Roy. Fine. Can we at least have the debate, though? Because every data point I look at says that the overall revenue that we're bringing into the federal Treasury is at an historic relative high. 3 times in history has it been this high. It might fall off a little. We'll see, right? Economic slowing down, and then you can blame that on Trump, blame that on Biden, blame that on the corporate taxes from 17, whatever. Fact is, that's just the truth. Yet we are bleeding money. It's just absolutely pouring out. The gentleman from Kentucky wears his debt clock, and so we're pushing $34 trillion. It's fine. I've heard Secretary Yellen dismiss that, saying, well, all that matters is the relative rates and looking at inflation. And, you know, all I know is I'm looking at the overall amount we're about to be paying on interest payments alone, and it's utterly devastating. And I know that, and I'm gonna leave it there for the most part without getting into it because we're not here for an economic discussion, but it all underpins everything trying to be accomplished by my friends in the Appropriations Committee and generally with what we're trying to do. And it's not easy. It's not easy to go through and figure out how to balance the fact that we just spent arguably $1 trillion with respect to the Inflation Reduction Act. If you believe Wall Street Journal's analysis and other outside analyses, we don't know. It's hundreds of billions, probably over $1 trillion. And so you're you go, okay, well, there's all of that, and there's all of the money that the gentleman refers to with respect to the money that's going out on some of these programs. You say, okay, well, do we cut it there? Do we cut it from the main programs? All of this money's going there. We got to cut it somewhere. So the thing that I would ask, Mr. Simpson, because you referred to some of this, and I know you care about it, about things like water programs. It was raised by the gentleman from Colorado about programs in Idaho or wherever it might be. I mean, in Texas, I mean, like, we're in a massive drought. Thankfully, we've had some rain in the last month, but we had a river, it's just dry. It dried up. We're in a drought. Lake Travis, the big lake that fuels Austin's water supply, we were praising the 5 feet increase because it's something like 80 feet below level. I mean, it's way down in a drought at the moment. So we know a little bit about water. My well is 600 feet below in order to go down and get water in our well. 600 feet we drill through, very hard water. I guess my question is, Texas is the 8th biggest economy in the world, according to the recent data just released. The governor put out this yesterday. Why do the people around the rest of the country need to fund water programs in Texas? I mean, it's a genuine question here. I mean, I think, are we not capable of figuring out how to get water? Like, do we need to borrow money from China in order for me to figure out how to get water, or for the people of Texas to figure out how to get water? It's just a genuine question, and shouldn't that inform some of what we're talking about here?
I think it's a legitimate question, and I can't tell you when the state and tribal assistance grants started, but they have been a major source, particularly in rural and small communities.
Sure.
When I look at my state and what I ask for in my state and stuff, I don't ask for the city of Boise.
Right.
They can afford their own. When I go to Grace, Idaho, there's no way that they can raise the property taxes enough there to pay for a water system. That's what I focus on.
Right.
And the same on reservations and that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
I think I think they came into existence when the federal government passed the Clean Drinking Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act. And since it was a federal law that you have to comply with as a local community, that then they put in, okay, here's the assistance to help you comply with that federal law.
Do you know if Idaho is the same as Texas, in which our clean water legislation in Texas predates the federal clean water legislation? Do you have similar
don't know.
legislation
I
in
don't
Idaho?
know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I guess my point is, without getting into a sort of federalism wormhole,
Yeah.
I guess what I'm just saying with respect to what you all attempted to do here in restraining spending, while there's a massive amount of money that went through in the so-called Inflation Reduction Act and various programs, that the effort you all were undertaking was to try to balance, if I understood your testimony, to try to balance the fact that there was a massive dump of expenditure by the federal government in what you would call a separate supplemental spending, right? As opposed to through our normal appropriations process. And you're trying to figure out, in light of that, like, you can't, as an appropriator, go cut off that spigot, right? Unless we go separately pass something to reduce some of the spending under that spigot.
Right.
And so we've got some rescissions that we've put in place, and you've deployed some of those. And some of those rescissions will backfill some of the cuts that we're talking about. I know, at least certainly with respect to some of the IRS rescissions.
Right.
And the fact here is, what we're trying to do is just manage the chaos. The chaos created by a massive amount of expenditures that we don't have money for at a time of historic federal receipts, at a time where we've got war rumblings around the world, that we may have to go into war mode at a point when we've got a debt to GDP ratio that is now higher than it was after World War II.
Yep.
And yet our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are just blithely just going around whistling, saying, sure, let's just keep going down this road.
Yep.
And then the only answer to that I've ever heard, the only answer is taxes, the evil 2017 Trump tax cuts. Okay, you say they're evil. Well, we need to change the way taxes are dealt with. We'll have that debate next year around when the taxes expire. Great, let's have that debate. Maybe we need to tweak the relative application of the taxes on middle class, hardworking Americans, small businesses, big businesses. Fine, let's have that debate. But overall receipts are at their highest level. So can we just stop with the nonsense? Can we just say, look, we just disagree on how we're going to spend the money. We disagree that we ought to be spending that much more than we take in, because we're going to spend $7 trillion on $5 trillion we take in. And no business, No American family can survive doing that. So I applaud that. I applaud you guys working on that. One question for Chairman Cole, and I mean it respectfully, because you've done a lot of great work in getting this through a tough bill. HUD is not an easy one to try to move through with all of the issues that are important to individuals. We got HUD, roads, transportation, Amtrak, all those issues. It is to get to the level of spending restraint you describe, it does require rescissions, right? So year over year, it's technically $3 billion more than 2023 in terms of the total dollars when you backfill the rescissions. Is that fair?
Not in terms of the total dollars. Remember, we have revenue stream. First of all, we had an emergency appropriation that was put on by the last Congress that we did not renew. So that's $3.6 billion we're not spending. Second, we had a tremendous fall in receipts. So if you look in terms of the refinancing that I mentioned earlier.
Yep.
So if you look at total spending in the bill, that is, look what's appropriated, look at the fees that come in, look at the emergency spending that we eliminated. In FY22, the HUD budget, total spending was $93 billion. It was raised in FY23 to $101 billion. It's now back to just below $93 billion. It's actually very slightly less, like I think $100 million less than in 93. So basically, we just roll back all the increases. Now, you had to appropriate some money to make up for the fees and the administration. So it looks like there's an increase. There's actually an $8 billion decrease in the total spending in these programs between FY23 and what we propose in 24.
Okay, I'll go back to the well and look at that.
Yeah, we'd be happy to
understand
get you the
fees,
numbers.
yeah.
We got staff here, but believe me, we are spending, this is kind of an interesting chart, which I'll make sure you get a copy of. But as you say, we can't show displays, but it will show you kind of where we were at and which pots of money the spending came out of. But total spending is actually less than it was.
I'll close with just one quick question, and thank you, Chairman Cole, for that. One quick question for both Mr. Simpson and Ms. Pingree. Is there, and I think the answers are going to be different between the two of you. Can each of you just elaborate a little bit on the extent to which you think, under the Biden administration, energy prices for the average American have gone up significantly? The impact in terms of energy costs for the average American, whether that's the price of gasoline, whether that's electricity, whether that's the across the board increase and impact, inflationary and otherwise. And can you talk a little bit about why that is? Like, who's at fault? Understanding that there's a war, but understanding that there are policies that have been adopted that restrain our ability to produce energy or make us dependent on certain forms of energy or certain countries. Has energy gone up? And how much of that is due to the Biden administration's policies? I'd ask each of you that question.
Do you want me to go first?
Please.
I'm sure she'd like to respond to what I have to say. I think it's almost entirely of the Biden administration policies. At the end of the Trump administration, whatever you think about Trump, we were energy independent in this country. And all of a sudden we came in and said, no, we're going to eliminate carbon out of the atmosphere over the next, 15, 20 years or whatever it was. We're going to stop drilling for oil, gas in this country, and we're going to go to wind and solar. Doesn't work real well. And in fact, there was no thought of the process that they were going through. And consequently, it's driven up the price of energy in this country. It's the price of gasoline in this country. Used to be, when I first came here, and it wasn't that long ago, when I went to the pump and it said $4, I thought, wow, it's gone nuts. Now it's standard, and that wasn't that long ago. So,
And if the gentleman would yield, that's notwithstanding the largest dump of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in history, correct?
absolutely, absolutely. So I think it's the policies, frankly, and I think we've got to get back to an all of the above energy policy that we had and that Republicans support and that we've had for a number of years until the start of the Biden administration.
Ms. Pingree?
Sure. Thanks for asking. I think we see this very differently. I mean, certainly, the war in Russia has driven up oil and gas prices and has had a significant impact on the current prices we're paying today. But I would say I look at this quite differently. Now, you and I might differ on whether or not, or Mr. Simpson and I might, about whether we have a climate crisis, but I would say that 99% of scientists are telling us that there is a serious climate crisis going on, and that we can't just sit back and wait. So that this idea that we're trying to switch to renewable energy isn't necessarily like a whim or a fad or something we're doing for, sort of fashion or some kind of ridiculous reason. It's because it is our responsibility to make sure we do reduce our dependence on foreign oil. Now, what I think a lot of my Republican colleagues miss is the beauty of what's in the IRA are enormous subsidies for homeowners, individuals, municipal buildings to convert on your own to solar, to renewable energy. And I think we often forget about that, and I know you guys usually want to cut that funding, and we'll fight about that quite a few times, but I just want to give you a personal example. I know you didn't ask, but too bad, here I am. I live in a rural state too. I have a well that's 435 feet, and I live in Maine, so obviously when you live in a rural area, you have to drill for water yourself. But when I decided to build my house, recently I was in a position to be able to put renewable energy in my own home. So I have extra thick insulation, I have triple glazed windows, I have solar panels on the roof, I have an inverter and a battery in the basement, I have a heat pump hot water heater, I have an induction stove, in spite of what people say about them. I did everything I possibly could to reduce my energy costs by those early investments. Now, I was lucky because I was able to do that on my own using what credits were available then. But right now, the average American and those who are low income can make even greater advantage of the money that's in the IRA and do exactly that. So if you want to talk about reducing energy costs, I used to pay significant energy costs. We live in an oil-dependent state where I am in the state of Maine. Oil bills are high, it's cold in the winter. Electricity is high in my state. Now, I live in an all-electric home. I charge up my car in my home. It costs me $15 a month to be connected to the grid and to sell back into the grid when I make excess energy. So I have no idea what you guys are talking about when you talk about the Biden administration not understanding how to reduce costs. I live in rural America, and everybody now can take advantage of that. That is absolutely a way to reduce energy costs. And you guys fight against it every day of the week. You fight against electric cars, you fight against induction stoves, you fight against solar panels. I'm just telling you, it works. Why would you do that?
With all due respect, I've looked at the math on that. I live on a hill, directly, no shade, right out there in the middle of Texas. Solar panels would be great. But even with all of the so-called help out of the Inflation Reduction Act, the math doesn't work for me. And the fact of the matter is, like, look, we've got Texas has more wind production and solar production than, well, maybe not solar, more wind production than anybody in the country, and a significant amount of solar production. The problem is that on a windless, cloudy day, then we don't have power. Like, we run up against a wall if we don't have the significant amount of coal and gas and nuclear backing that up for the
You
grid.
can have all of the above, and you can make it work.
Right, I know, and Republicans embraced that, frankly, to a fault, because now we're in an upside-down environment where we don't have the energy supplies that we need to fuel what we need for the state of Texas, and we're getting to the place where every summer and every winter, we hit up against a mark where we don't have the power. And so the issue here isn't about, it's a question is money just doesn't grow. So you say, well, great, go get a battery-powered car, plug it in. Well, you're going to use up as much electricity as you would with an air conditioning unit. So where are you going to get that electricity? Okay, great, solar panels. Well, where are you going to buy that from, and who's going to supply it? If you're going to go, who's subsidizing it? Somebody's paying for it. It isn't just made up, it's not free. So somebody has to pay for that. You have to be able to get the power. And right now what we're saying is, and I think the gentlelady acknowledged it, is that we're demanding of the American people that they eat the harm, they eat the pain of inflation being driven heavily by energy prices, so that we can hopefully one day get to the place where we're producing all of this energy magically, never minding our reliance on foreign powers like China, never minding the impact on our own current economy with respect to oil and gas, just straight up inflationary pressures. That's what we're demanding of the American people. You must eat inflation through all of these additional costs just so we can hopefully achieve something that, frankly, would have likely minimal impact on overall CO2 production relative to the world.
With all due respect, you don't have to eat, I mean, you should talk to Representative Massey. He has solar panels on the roof too.
Sure.
And maybe he and I can help you figure out the math, because with all due respect,
Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about why you can't take advantage of it and why those
Because
things.
Mr. Massey invested that with his own resources that he made through the private sector because he
I know, but
enjoys
now
doing that.
President Biden and the
Mr.
IRA
Massey is happy to be off the grid, and you know what? Great, God bless him.
Well-
But what he opposed, I don't want to speak for him, but I've talked to him about it, violently opposes the mandates coming down from government to achieve it, as opposed to individuals being able to go out and afford it in the marketplace and to be able to go buy something in the competitive market. The fact is, the gentleman acknowledged it, and it's really important for this entire debate. My Democratic colleagues are saying the American people must pay an inflationary tax by virtue of the choices being made on policies with respect to a forced transition to so-called green power supply, and that is what they're having now to eat. And it's actually playing out in real time. And there are real families today who can't afford to live because of what they're eating in terms of the cost. And unlike Secretary Granholm, they can't just blow into a place, push out the pregnant family, and plug into the car to charge up while they're trying to drive somewhere, like Secretary Granholm recently did. With all the, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, sure, I'll yield.